Hello friend. Today I am going to go through in detail about getting started generating documents with the Document Assembler module that is part of Open-Xml-PowerTools. If you haven't watched the video that shows how to get the latest Open-Xml-PowerTools from GitHub, please see this video at this link. It will show you everything you need to know in order to get the Open-Xml-PowerTools and successfully build the code. In order to use the Document Assembler module, you need to use content controls. And in order to use content controls, you need to enable the Developer tab. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do first. To enable the Developer tab, go to File, Options. We want to customize the ribbon, and we want to click this checkbox right here that then shows us the Developer tab. Let's start with the simplest possible example. We'll create a document that has a content control in it that we want to replace with data from an XML file. Here I'm in the Open-Xml-PowerTools directory as downloaded from GitHub. Let's open up the Open-Xml-PowerTools examples solution. There are 3 examples for Document Assembler. There is this example called just Document Assembler, and then there's Document Assembler 01 and Document Assembler 02. The Document Assembler example is a small command line program that you can use just from a command prompt to run Document Assembler. If you're doing little bits of experimentation with creating template documents and using those template documents to pull data from some sample XML file, that's a really easy way to get going. We'll use that today. Just for reference, Document Assembler 01 is an example that contains a template document and contains an XML file. You can simply set that as the startup project, run it, and it will do a fairly typical document assembly. Document Assembler 01 uses the approach of using content controls. Document Assembler 02 is very similar, except that it uses an approach that doesn't use content controls and instead uses a less than hash and hash greater than to delineate the XML in the document. We'll cover that in this tutorial today. First thing I'm going to do is just build this document assembler example, and it actually is already up to date on my computer. I'll open that folder in Windows Explorer. If we go to bin debug, we can see the DocumentAssembler.exe that was just built. For today's example, just to keep it very simple, we'll be working directly in this directory. Of course, in your scenario, you may want to integrate Document Assembler directly into your application, in which case you will want to grab the code from either this example or one of the other examples and integrate that code directly into your application. I'll open up a command prompt at this location. First thing we need to do is create a little template document for this tutorial. I'll create a file template.docx and open it in Word. I'll insert a little bit of random text in there. Let's say that we want to insert the name of the customer right here. Let's insert a content control right here. I'll go to the Developer tab and I'll insert a content control. And I'll put a little bit of XML in there. we're going to select the name element, which is a child of the root element of the XML file. We don't need to set any properties for this content control. We could come up here and click properties and set the title or the tag. We don't need any of those properties for using Document Assembler. One thing that makes this a little bit easier to see is to put Word into design mode, and then we get these nice delimiters around the XML that we're putting into this content control. So what this XML says is we have some content that we want to insert here. We're going to select the name element that is a child of the root element and put it at this point in the document. I'll put a comma after that content control because that's probably what we want in the generated document. Now let's create a little bit of XML that is going to be used for populating this template document. We'll use data.xml, and I'll edit that XML with my favorite text editor. I'll put in the root element. That can be whatever you want it to be. And I'll put in a name element with some content in there. If I run Document Assembler without any arguments, it tells me that the usage is Document Assembler followed by the template document followed by the XML data file, followed by what we want for the assembled document. So I'll type in Document Assembler. The name of the template file is template.docx. The name of the data file is data.xml. And the output file, we'll call it out1.docx. And it runs. Let's look at the resulting file. And there we can see the content control has been removed, and that content control has been replaced with the actual text from that data file. Let's go back to the template document. I'll put it back into design mode so we can see the content controls. One thing that I often do when maintaining documents like this is to define a little macro to make it very easy to insert a content control. I'll go to the Developer tab, record a macro, name it Insert Content Control. I'll tell it the keyboard shortcut I want in this situation is Control Q. You can pick whatever it is that you want. Now we're recording. Insert the content control, and I'll tell it to stop recording. Next, let's create a little table and populate that table with data from that XML file. I'll insert a table. I'll tell it I want 3 columns and 2 rows. Let's give it some nice formatting here. We'll pick this black and white style right here. Now we need to insert a content control immediately before this table that specifies the data in the XML file that we're going to select to populate this table. I'll tell it I want to select all of the member elements underneath the members element that is a child of the root element of that data file. I'll select that XML that I just pasted into this document, and I'll type the key for that macro, Control Q, so that it surrounds that XML with a content control. Now let's put some text in for the column headings. I'll put in first name, I'll put in age, and I'll put in hair color. Now in the second row, I'm going to put in XPath expressions that are relative to the member element, and this XPath expression will select the data that is going to go into each particular row in this table that we're going to generate. So I'll put in /first name, I'll put in /age, and /hair color. Let's go to our data file here. Now we've got our members element. Now we're going to have repeating member elements. And underneath this member element, I'm going to have first name. I'll copy that member element, put in another name there, and one more. I'll save the data.xml. We don't need to close this file because this text editor doesn't lock that file for editing. However, we do need to close the template document in Word because Word locks that file, and Open-Xml-PowerTools nor any other program can open this template document while Word has it open. I'll run DocumentAssembler with the exact same arguments. And let's look at the resulting document. And now we can see that we have a nicely formatted table with all of the data from our XML file. Let's go back to the template document. I'll turn design mode back on. The next scenario that you'll commonly find when generating a document is repeating content in the generated document. So let's say that instead of inserting that data as a table, we want to insert that data as paragraph content that repeats for every item that is selected in our select statement. First thing to do is to insert a repeat element in our XML, and we're going to need an end repeat. I'll select that paragraph and type Control Q, which will surround that with a content control. And now let's put in some content that gets repeated for every one of these members. We want to say hello. One thing you'll notice here is that Word inserted these smart quotes. One thing that you can do here is after you've inserted a smart quote, you can actually just press Control Z and Word will change it to straight quotes. You can do this if you want to. DocumentAssembler will properly process this XML regardless of whether it has smart quotes or straight up and down quotes. We've got our XML in there, but we need to put content controls around this, so I can select that XML, type Control Q, and that puts in my content control so that DocumentAssembler can properly process that XML. Do that for that XML and again. And that's all we need to do here. I'll save the template document, delete my output document, and run DocumentAssembler again. And now we can see the repeating content that was inserted. The next thing that we might want to do is we might want to have some content that is conditionally included based on certain values in our XML data. Let's add another element here. We'll add this element city with the value of Seattle. I'll add this conditional XML that looks at the city and sees if it matches Seattle. I need to also add an end conditional. I'll say, is it raining today? And include the name in that paragraph. And of course, we need to put our content controls around these pieces of XML. I'll put it back into design mode and put the XML there. So if the element city, which is a child of the root element, matches Seattle, I'm going to ask if it's raining today. As you might guess, I have lived in Seattle. Let's close the template document. Delete the output document and run DocumentAssembler again. And we can see the content that says, is it raining today, Eric White? Let's say I change the name of the city to Denver. Run DocumentAssembler again. And now we can see that that conditional content wasn't included. Finally, we might have a situation where if there is a particular element, we might want to include the contents of that element as a complete paragraph. But if that element doesn't exist, we might want to just not include that content. Nothing should be included in the generated document. Here, I'll get rid of this down here. Turn on design mode. I'm going to grab this whole content control right here and insert it down here. I'll tell it to look for the content addendum, and if that element exists, then we want to include it, but if that element doesn't exist, we don't want to include it. The way that we do that is we add one more attribute to this little bit of XML. Optional equals true. I'll add something down there at the bottom so that we can see whether that addendum was included or not. This time though, instead of having a plain text content control, I want a rich text content control that includes the paragraph mark. So I'm going to remove this content control. I'm going to tell it I want a rich text content control. And in this case, I want the paragraph mark to be inside the content control. And this time we can see there was no addendum included. Now let's go modify the XML and add an addendum. Let's save the XML. Run DocumentAssembler again. And now we can see that that addendum was included. However, if the addendum didn't exist in the XML data source, it doesn't cause an error. It simply doesn't include that content. And of course, any formatting that we do to this template document will flow through to the generated document. So let's say that I want the name to be in some special formatting. Here we'll use one of the fancy word styles. I'll put in this orange 3D font. Let's make this larger. If I turn on the design mode, we can see that the XML has that interesting font, but nothing else does. And looking at the generated document, we can see that that formatting flowed through very nicely into the generated document. Now let's make some changes to make our template document invalid. Let's say that instead of selecting /name, I selected /name_z, which is not an element in that data file. And further, I don't have the optional equals true in this little bit of XML. The document assembler executable tells us that there are errors in the template. So now we want to look at that assembled document, and it tells us that that XPath expression ./name_z returned no results. If I put optional equals true, this error wouldn't have been generated, but because I didn't have it, it will generate that error. There are various cases throughout Document Assembler where you might generate an error. If you select repeating data and there is no repeating data, it'll tell you about that. If your XPath expression doesn't select any data, it will tell you about that. If you have invalid XML, let's go up here and change that to ./name, but let's get rid of this slash. Then that XML will be invalid. And the generated document will tell us that that XML was invalid. It shows us the XML exception that was thrown by the XML parser when it tried to process that little bit of XML in the template document. Looking at DocumentAssembler.cs, this is the example program that we've been running. We can see it looks for 3 arguments, and if it doesn't find 3 arguments, it prints the usage. It then gets the 3 arguments and does a little bit of validation on them. And here is the sum total of all of the code to fire off Document Assembler to do the document assembly. As you can see, it's pretty trivial to use Document Assembler from your code. One more thing that I want to show you today about Document Assembler. If you want to, you don't need to use content controls. Let's remove this content control. So now I'll put it into design mode, and instead now I have this XML directly in the document. And what I can do is I can preface that XML with ># and also at the end I'll put a #. This works equally as well. If you want to use this approach rather than inserting content controls, you are certainly free to do so. This might be more accessible to certain types of users who need to maintain template documents, and you don't necessarily want to have to train them on how to enable the developer tab in Word. You can also use this approach of just putting a less than hash and a hash greater than around your XML. Here I'll do it to one other field here. I'll put a less than hash there. I'll put a hash greater than. Save it. I'll also add my slash back into the XML so that we have valid XML. Save it. Close it. And when we look at our generated document, everything looks exactly the same as if we used content controls. The two approaches are semantically equivalent. Pick whichever one is easier for you or your users to use. That's all I'm going to cover in this video. This should be enough to get you going generating documents using DocumentAssembler, using a template document that you set up either with content controls or that special less than hash and hash greater than that surrounds the XML. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.